Emily Morgan sat atop a worn wooden bench, her fingers gripping the rough edges of the seat as she watched the world roll by. She had dreamed of this journey once, when the West had been nothing more than a place in her father's stories. Now, it was a harsh reality, a land both beautiful and merciless. Her father, James Morgan, rode ahead on horseback, his rifle slung across his back. A strong man, hardened by years of struggle, he had promised his children a new beginning beyond the plains. Beside him, her older brother, William, shared the same steely gaze. He was only 19 but carried himself like a man twice his age, ever watchful, ever ready. Emily wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders as the wind kicked up dust from the dry earth. The land stretched forever in all directions, vast and empty. It made her uneasy. This was Cheyenne country, they all knew it. A gunshot rang out, the sound cracked through the air like a whip, shattering the morning calm. Horses reared, wagons jerked to a halt, and panic surged through the caravan. Then came the war cries. Emily turned just in time to see them cresting the hill, riders, fast and silent as ghosts, the sun flashing off their painted faces and feathered braids. Arrows whistled past, thudding into wood and flesh alike. Her father was already in motion. "William, get your rifle." William dropped the reins and fumbled for his weapon. Another shot rang out, this one from the caravan. A warrior tumbled from his horse, rolling in a cloud of dust. But more came, too many. Emily's heart pounded. She barely had time to process the chaos before hands grabbed at her, rough, unyielding. She screamed, kicking, clawing, but she was yanked from the wagon and thrown to the ground. The world spun. The last thing she saw before darkness closed in was her father, fighting, shouting her name. When she woke, the world was moving. Her wrists were bound, the coarse rope biting into her skin. Her mouth was dry, her head aching. She was on horseback, slung before the saddle like a sack of grain. The rhythmic motion of the ride made her stomach churn. Distantly, she heard the murmur of voices, the snorting of horses. She turned her head, her vision blurry. They rode in a line, silhouetted against the evening sky. The warriors moved with quiet purpose, their faces unreadable in the flickering torchlight. Fear gripped her chest, but she forced herself to steady her breath. She wasn't alone. Other captives rode among them, their faces pale with terror. Women, mostly. A boy no older than 10 clung to the saddle in front of one of the warriors, silent, wide-eyed. The warrior who carried her slowed his horse, shifting his grip. She caught a glimpse of his face, young, sharp features, dark eyes that held something she couldn't name. He noticed her looking. "You are awake." His voice was low, accented. She swallowed, unsure if she should answer. "You do not speak?" he asked. Emily gathered her courage. "Where are you taking us?" He did not answer. They rode through the night, deeper into the unknown. By the time they reached the village, exhaustion weighed heavy on her limbs. Fires burned in the darkness, the scent of smoke thick in the air. Shadowy figures moved between the lodges, whispering, watching. The warriors dismounted, dragging the captives from their saddles. Emily's feet hit the ground, but her legs gave way. Hands grabbed her, steadying her before she collapsed. Then, he was there. A man stepped forward, taller than the others, his presence commanding. His face was lined with age, but his dark eyes held the sharpness of a hawk. The chief. The warriors parted for him, their heads bowing slightly in respect. He looked over the captives, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke. "Why have you brought them?" One of the warriors stepped forward. "For trade, for vengeance." The chief's gaze swept over Emily, pausing. He studied her, as if weighing something. "She is young," he said at last. "She does not hold a rifle." "She is white," another warrior said bitterly. "That is enough." A murmur ran through the gathered men. The chief turned to the young warrior who had carried her. "What do you say, Wanacha?" Emily's captor straightened. "His name." "She does not deserve to die," Wanacha said. His voice was firm. A warrior scoffed. "Are you so quick to defend them, after all they have done?" Wanacha's jaw tightened. "I defend what is right." The tension in the air thickened. The chief considered. Then finally he gave a single nod. "She will live." A sharp outcry followed. Anger, disbelief. She should be killed. They will come for her, bring war upon us. The chief raised a hand, silencing them. His gaze never wavered. She will live, he repeated, his voice steel. The decision was made. Emily was pulled to her feet and led away. Her heart pounded, but she held her head high. She did not know what fate awaited her now, only that she was still breathing. That night, she sat by a small fire, watching the flames dance. Around her, the village moved as if unaware of the turmoil within her chest. Wanaksha approached, crouching beside her. "You should sleep," he said. She eyed him warily. "Why? Did you speak for me?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because I have seen enough blood." Emily searched his face, looking for deception. She found none. A silence settled between them. Then, without another word, Wanaka rose and walked away, disappearing into the night. Emily sat there, her hands still bound, the fire flickering before her. She was alive, for now. The morning broke with a biting wind carrying the scent of damp earth and distant rain. The village stirred to life in the cold dawn, but not with the usual rhythm of quiet voices and soft drumbeats. Instead, an uneasy murmur rippled through the lodges, gathering force like a storm on the horizon. Emily was gone. Wanaksha stood before his father, his shoulders squared but his hands clenched at his sides. The firelight flickered across his face, casting deep shadows beneath his eyes. The gathered warriors surrounded them in a tight circle, their expressions ranging from suspicion to outright fury. Black Wolf, the chief, regarded his son in silence, his dark eyes heavy with something deeper than anger. Disappointment. A father's disappointment. "She is gone," he said at last, his voice low but carrying through the gathering. "And you, my son, are the only one who saw her last." Wanaka's jaw tightened. "I did not take her." A warrior stepped forward. Kosa, older, broad-shouldered, his hair streaked with gray. He was known for his cold heart, for the way he fought without hesitation. He was a man who had lost too much to war and had learned only to give it back in blood. "You let her go," Kosa said, his voice flat with certainty. Wanaksha's fists curled tighter, but he did not deny it. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "The white men will come for her," another warrior spat. "They will bring their guns and their soldiers." "She is one girl," Wanaka said, his voice steady, but his heart pounded against his ribs. "One girl will not bring war." "She is a settler," Kosa snapped, "and you would risk all of us for her." Black Wolf held up a hand, silencing them. His gaze never left Wanaksha. "You knew the laws of our people," he said. "You knew what taking her meant. Yet you let her go." Wanaksha swallowed, forcing himself to meet his father's gaze. "I did what I believed was right." A flicker of something, pain, regret, passed through Black Wolf's face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He exhaled through his nose, as if bracing himself against a weight too great to bear. "You will go after her," Black Wolf said finally. "You will bring her back." Wanaka flinched. "I cannot." "You must." His father's voice hardened. "Or you will not return at all." The words struck like a blade to the gut. Exile. A hush fell over the warriors. Even Kosa, who had so quickly called for punishment, seemed to hesitate. To be cast out was a fate worse than death. No tribe, no name, no home. A man alone in the wild, hunted by enemies, shunned by his own. For a long moment, Wanaksha did not speak. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I will find her." The decision had been made. His fate was set. Without another word, he turned and walked toward his horse. The gathered warriors parted for him, but their eyes burned into his back like fire. He did not look at his father. He could not. Wanaksha rode hard from the village, his heart hammering with the knowledge that the warriors would not wait long before following. He had no illusions. Kosa wanted his blood. Even if he returned with Emily, there would be no peace. For him, not anymore. The trail was fresh, and she had left in haste. He could see the signs in the earth, the broken blades of grass, the small, hurried footprints. She had fled toward the river, smart, but not smart enough. A storm was brewing, thick clouds rolling in from the west. The wind carried the scent of rain and the promise of a long, cold night. He found her tracks leading into a dense grove of cottonwoods. The river whispered beyond, its waters dark and swift. Then he saw her. Emily crouched at the river's edge, struggling with something, her hands still bound. She was trying to free herself, rubbing the ropes against the jagged rocks. Her hair was wild, tangled with leaves and dust. She was exhausted, desperate. He dismounted, moving without sound. She didn't notice him until he was almost upon her. Emily spun, scrambling back. Her chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. Her hands clenched into fists even as the rope still bound them. "I won't go back," she said. Her voice was hoarse, raw. He studied her. "You are not ready for the wild. I'd rather die here than go back to them." Something inside him twisted. "I'm not here to take you back," he said. "Not yet." She hesitated, eyes narrowing. "Then what do you want?" He pulled a knife from his belt. For a brief moment, fear flashed in her eyes, but before she could react, he crouched and cut the rope binding her wrists. She stared at him, rubbing at the raw skin where the cords had bitten into her flesh. "You will not survive alone," he said. "The storm is coming. You have no food, no shelter." "I'll manage," she said, stubbornly. Wanacha sighed, glancing at the sky. The first drops of rain touched his skin, cold as ice. "If you wish to die out here, I will not stop you," he said. "But if you wish to live, come with me." Emily looked at him for a long time. Then, grudgingly, she nodded. They moved quickly, finding shelter beneath a rocky overhang just as the sky opened up. Rain poured in sheets, turning the ground to mud, drumming against the earth with relentless force. Emily sat with her arms wrapped around herself, shivering. Wanacha built a small fire, shielding it from the wind with his body. The flames flickered, casting long shadows across the stone. "Why did you let me go?" she asked suddenly. He stared into the fire. "Because I have seen enough killing." Emily watched him, her expression unreadable. She was not like the others. He had seen settlers before, seen them march west with their heavy wagons and hungry eyes, but she did not look at him with hatred. Not now. "I won't go back," she said again, softer this time. He met her gaze. "You may not have a choice." The storm raged through the night, but neither of them slept. By dawn the rain had passed, leaving the world fresh and raw. They moved swiftly, Wanacha leading the way through the wet underbrush. They had gone no more than an hour when he felt it. The kind presence of others. He held up a hand, signaling for her to stop. She obeyed without question, her breath coming fast. Then he saw them. 3 warriors moved through the trees, silent as shadows. Kosa among them. They had found them. Emily tensed beside him. She knew what this meant. Wanacha exhaled slowly, steeling. Himself. There was only one way this would end. He stepped forward, placing himself between her and the warriors. "I will not go back," he said. Kosa smiled, slow and cruel. "Then you die here." The fight came fast, brutal. Kosa struck first, swinging a hatchet that barely missed Wanacha's head. He twisted, countering with a blow to the ribs, but the older warrior was strong, relentless. Emily stood frozen, her hands clenched. Then, without thinking, she grabbed a fallen branch and swung. The wood cracked against Kosa's skull. He stumbled, and in that moment, Wanacha drove his knife deep into his side. Kosa gasped, his eyes wide with shock. Then slowly he crumpled to the ground. The other warriors hesitated, glancing at each other. Their leader was dead. Wanacha did not wait. He grabbed Emily's hand. "Run!" They ran, vanishing into the wilderness, the cries of the warriors echoing behind them. There was no turning back now. The wind howled through the trees, carrying the scent of wet earth and blood. Wanacha and Emily ran, their footsteps pounding against the muddy ground, their breath ragged from exhaustion. The shouts of the warriors faded behind them, swallowed by the storm-drenched wilderness. Emily stumbled, her legs trembling beneath. Herbert Wanacha caught her arm, pulling her upright. "Not yet," he said, his voice low, urgent. "We keep moving." Her body ached, but she forced herself forward. The world blurred around her, branches whipping past, the sting of cold. Rain against her skin, the pulse of her own heartbeat hammering in her ears. She couldn't think, couldn't stop. All she knew was that stopping meant death. The trees thinned, opening into a stretch of rocky hills. The river lay ahead, its dark waters swollen from the storm. Wanaka slowed, scanning the terrain. We'll follow the river's bend, he muttered. We go another way. Emily barely registered his words, her vision tunneling to the jagged rocks beneath her feet. The fight with Kosa replayed in her mind, the shock in his eyes, the blood on the blade. She had seen death before, but never so close, never so final. She had played a part in it. A sharp pain in her palm drew her focus downward. She had been gripping a thorned branch without realizing it. The blood welled along her fingers, mixing with the rain. Wanacha's voice cut through the haze. We climb. She looked up at the rocky incline before them, slick with rain, treacherous underfoot. She swallowed hard. I can't, she breathed. You must. Something in his tone left no room for doubt. He turned and began the ascent, his movements swift, practiced. Emily hesitated only a moment before following. Her hands slipped against the cold rock, her boots scraping against the slick surface. Her limbs ached, but she pushed upward, gripping whatever she could find. The wind tugged at her, threatening to rip her from the mountain's grasp. Halfway up, she faltered, her foot sliding dangerously close to the edge. Panic surged through her, but before she could fall, Wanaka's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. His strength anchored her. Hold on, he said, his voice steady. She nodded, swallowing her fear. With his help, she found her footing again, pressing forward until finally she hauled herself over the ledge, collapsing onto solid ground. The rain had lessened to a drizzle, the world eerily quiet except for the wind rustling through the trees below. She rolled onto her back, gasping for breath, staring at the endless expanse of sky. Wanacha crouched beside her, his eyes scanning the horizon. They will search for us in the valley first. We have time. Emily sat up slowly, her body trembling. Time for what? To find shelter, to survive. She turned her gaze toward the horizon. The land stretched before them, wild and unforgiving. There was no sign of civilization, no hint of safety. She clenched her jaw. Where do we go? He looked at her then, something unreadable in his expression. We keep moving west. Emily exhaled a shuddering breath. West. Away from everything she had ever known. She had no other choice. The day wore on in silence, their pace steady but cautious. Wanacha moved with an instinct honed by years of living off the land. He led them through narrow passes, across streams swollen with rain, avoiding open plains where they would be easy prey. Emily followed, her mind tangled with thoughts she couldn't unravel. She did not trust him. Not fully. And yet he had saved her, more than once. He had chosen her life over his place among his people. She did not understand why. As the sun dipped lower, the temperature dropped. Her clothes clung to her skin, still damp from the storm. She shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. Wanacha noticed. There is an old cabin ahead, he said, abandoned. We rest there. She said nothing, but relief flooded her. She didn't care if the cabin was crumbling. Anything was better than another night exposed to the elements. The journey took another hour before they came upon the structure, half hidden by overgrown brush. It was small, the roof sagging in places, but the walls still stood. Wanacha pushed the door open cautiously, stepping inside first. The scent of rotting wood and dust filled the air. A single table sat in the corner, a rusted lantern atop it. Emily followed, wrapping her arms around herself as she took in their surroundings. It will do, he said simply. She sat by the fireplace watching as he moved to gather wood. Her exhaustion settled deep, numbing her limbs. She did not realize she had fallen asleep until the warmth of firelight brushed her skin. When she opened her eyes, Wanacha was sitting nearby, tending the small flames. For a long moment, she simply watched him. Why did you stay? She asked softly. He did not look at her. I told you before, he said. I have seen enough blood. She hesitated. Is that the only reason? He exhaled, his fingers tightening around the edge of his knee. When I was a child, my mother told me that the world is more than just war, he said. She believed there could be peace. Emily's breath caught. Your mother? He nodded, still not looking at her. She was like you. The words settled between them, heavy and unspoken. Emily had 1,000 questions, but something in his face told her he would not answer them tonight. Instead, she whispered, "I don't want to. Go back." He finally met her gaze. "Then we must be ready for what comes next." The fire flickered between them, casting shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying the echoes of a world that would not let them go. The night smelled of pine and smoke, the air thick with tension. Wanacha knew they were coming. He had felt it long before the first whisper of hoofbeats reached his ears. Emily sat beside him, staring into the fire, though he knew her thoughts were elsewhere. Her hands rested in her lap, but they were tense, fingers curled slightly, as if bracing for a blow. She had changed. The frightened girl who had once trembled in his grasp was gone. In her place sat someone sharper, harder, someone who had learned through fire and blood that survival had a cost. He stood, testing the weight of his knife. "They will be here before dawn," she looked up sharply. "How many?" "Enough." He met her gaze. "You do not have to fight." She gave a hollow laugh. "You think I would run now?" She shook her head, standing. "They'll kill you, even if you bring me back." Wanacha did not argue. They both knew the truth. There was no returning to the life he had known, no home waiting in the village. Kosa's death had sealed his fate. A sound broke the silence. Distant, the rustle of leaves where there should have been stillness. Emily turned toward the noise, her breath hitching. Wanaka reached for his bow. "Go inside." She hesitated. "Wanaka." "Now." She obeyed, vanishing into the shadows of the cabin. He crouched low, muscles taut, senses reaching into the darkness. A lone figure stepped into the firelight, the glow licking at the worn leather of his war belt, the silver streaks in his braided hair. Black Wolf. For a long moment neither of them moved. Then the chief exhaled slowly. It did not have to come to this. Wanaka did not lower his bow. And yet, here we are. Black Wolf's gaze flicked toward the cabin, his expression unreadable. "They say you killed Kosa." "I did." Wanaka's grip tightened. "Would you have me regret it?" Black Wolf studied him, then gave a slow nod. "You have made your choice." A rustling behind him, more figures emerging from the darkness. Warriors half hidden in the trees, waiting for the signal. Emily had been right. They had not come for justice. They had come for death. Wanaka squared his stance. "I will not go with you." A shadow passed through the chief's eyes. "Then you leave me no choice." A hand raised. The first arrow flew. Wanaka dropped low, rolling as the shaft buried itself into the dirt where he had stood. He loosed an arrow of his own, striking one of the warriors in the shoulder. A cry of pain, more movement. The night erupted into chaos. Emily burst from the cabin, a rifle in her hands. She did not hesitate. The shot rang out, cutting through. The din. The warriors hesitated. They had not expected her to fight. Wanacha used the moment. He drove forward, slashing his knife across the leg of the nearest man, knocking him to the ground. Black Wolf did not move. He stood in the eye of the storm, watching his son, unreadable. The battle raged around them, but Wanaka knew it would not last long. He and Emily were outnumbered. The warriors were pressing in, tightening the noose. Then, without warning, Black Wolf raised a hand again. "Stop!" The warriors froze. Emily kept her rifle raised, breath coming fast, her eyes darting. Between them, Wanacha did not lower his knife. "Why?" he demanded. Black Wolf studied him, his face a mask of stone. "Because I have seen enough blood." The words hit like a blow, the same words Wanaka had spoken before. Black Wolf stepped forward, passing through the line of warriors. He stood before Wanacha, close enough that the firelight illuminated the deep lines in his face. "You were my son," he said, "and you have chosen your own path." Silence stretched between them. "Go," the chief said at last, "before I change my mind." Wanacha did not move. He could see the conflict in his father's eyes, the war that raged beneath the surface. Emily took a step forward, her voice cautious. "We go and you don't follow?" Black Wolf looked at her then, his gaze steady. "We do not follow." Wanacha knew what this meant. This was no act of mercy. This was exile. He met his father's gaze one last time, searching for something, anything left between them. He found nothing. Without another word he turned. Emily hesitated only a moment before following. They did not look back. The dawn rose behind them, painting the sky in streaks of fire and gold. The land stretched before them, vast and empty. Emily pulled her shawl tighter against the chill. "Where? Do we go now?" Wanacha exhaled. "West." She glanced at him, a small, tired smile pulling at the edges of her mouth. "West," she repeated, and together they rode into the unknown. The sun was a molten brand, searing the vast, unbroken sky, its heat pressing down upon the land with merciless weight. Julia Carter's cracked lips parted as she drew a shallow breath, the air itself dry and unyielding. Her skin, once fair, was darkened by sun and dust, her dress torn and stiff with old blood. The wind carried the scent of scorched earth, rattling through brittle sagebrush as if whispering secrets of the dead. She knew then, with cold certainty, that she had been left to join them. The wagons were gone. Not a trace of them lingered on the horizon, not a single glimmer of iron-rimmed wheels, no dust trail curling into the sky, just an empty expanse of desolation. Her hands trembled as she pushed herself upright, the movement sluggish, each muscle shrieking protest. They had abandoned her, like a spent cartridge, discarded without thought or hesitation. The night before, when they had made camp by a withered creek bed, Julia had sensed the shift in the settlers' eyes. They no longer looked at her with sympathy or even pity, but with something colder, practicality. The wagon master, a man of thick shoulders and a thicker scowl, had spoken quietly to the others, his words lost beneath the murmuring wind. Julia had known what was coming, but knowing had done nothing to stop it. They had not even left her a horse. She staggered forward, her boots dragging in the dust. A single canteen lay beside a rock where they had tossed it, as if that meager offering would ease their guilt. The water inside sloshed weakly, less than half full. She lifted it with hands stiff from exhaustion, took a careful sip, and forced herself to swallow past the tightness in her throat. She would not cry, not for them. Her husband Samuel had been shot a week past, a bullet tearing through his gut during a raid near the trading post. He had bled out beneath the punishing sun, his fingers wrapped weakly around hers, his lips forming words she could not hear, and now he was gone. She had thought grief would be her end, had thought she would simply waste away in the back of the wagon, her body as lifeless as the man she had loved. But the settlers had other plans. They could not afford dead weight. A vulture drifted in lazy circles above her, its black wings catching the sunlight. It knew. It had seen this before. Julia pressed her fist to her stomach, forcing herself forward, step by step. The land stretched in every direction. Hard-packed earth, distant red rock mesas, dry riverbeds that promised water, but delivered only dust. The heat had a weight of its own, dragging at her limbs, settling into the hollow ache in her chest. She walked because there was nothing else to do. She walked because to sit was to surrender, and she had not yet decided if she would. By midday, the world wavered at the edges, mirages twisting across the flat land like mocking spectres. She had long since stopped wiping the sweat from her brow. It was better to let it drip than to waste what little moisture she had left. Her mind wavered between exhaustion and memory. Samuel's laughter, the way he had looked at her on their wedding night, the whispered promises of a future that would never come. Then she saw the shadow. It was small at first, little more than a suggestion of movement near the rocks ahead. Julia blinked against the sun, her hand tightening around the canteen. The shadow shifted again, resolving into a figure, tall, still, watching. A man. Her breath caught, her heart pounding in her chest, a mixture of fear and wild, desperate hope surging through her veins. She had no weapon, no means to defend herself, if he meant harm. But he was alone. That at least was something. The stranger did not move as she approached. He stood against the ochre-colored rock, his arms loose at his sides, the long barrel of a rifle resting easily against one shoulder. His face was cast in shadow, but she could see enough. High cheekbones, dark eyes that missed nothing, black hair pulled back in a loose tie, an Indian. The settlers had spoken of them in whispers, with fear and loathing. Wild men, savages, raiders, who took what they wanted and left nothing but bones behind. Julia had never met one. She had never expected to. Now there was no one else. She stopped several paces away, swaying slightly on her feet. He watched her in silence, unreadable. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat, thick and useless. She swallowed hard and tried again. Her voice cracked, weak from thirst and fatigue. She cleared her throat, squaring her shoulders. I need water. The man remained motionless. A breeze stirred the dust between them. Then, slowly, he lifted his free hand, fingers pointing toward the canteen at her side. His meaning was clear. She already had water. Julia's grip tightened around the flask. Not enough. Silence. His dark gaze held hers, steady, assessing. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. Panic clawed at her chest. She took a stumbling step forward. Wait! He did not stop. Julia surged after him, her legs nearly giving out beneath her. Please, she gasped, her voice raw. Please. He paused. The wind whispered between them, the land stretching wide and empty in all directions. Then, with a slow deliberation, he turned to face her once more. He studied her, really studied her, the way her dress hung in tatters, the way her breath came shallow and desperate, the way her fingers trembled despite the effort to still them. She was nothing to him, less than nothing, a dying woman on a dying trail. But he was still watching her. The man exhaled softly, as if deciding something. Then he moved, stepping toward her in a way that made every instinct in her body scream, to flee. But she didn't. She couldn't. He reached for her. Julia flinched, but he did not strike her. Instead, his fingers brushed against her wrist, closing gently over her pulse. His touch was warm, solid, real. Then, without a word, he lifted her over his shoulder like she weighed nothing at all. The world tilted. She gasped, struggling weakly, but she had no strength left. The desert spun around her, her limbs heavy, her vision swimming. Somewhere in the distance, a vulture cried. Then darkness. Julia woke to the scent of smoke and unfamiliar earth. Her body sore in ways she hadn't thought possible. The world felt different, warmer, close. She tried to move, but a thick hide covered her, its weight pressing her down. Her fingers brushed against the coarse fibers of a woven mat beneath her, and slowly, cautiously, she opened her eyes. The room, or rather, the shelter, was dimly lit by the low glow of a fire, its embers pulsing with soft light. The walls were curved, made of packed earth and timber, and smoke curled lazily toward a small opening in the ceiling. It was not a place she recognized, nor one built by any settler's hand. Then she heard it, the quiet rustling of movement, and he turned her head sharply, pain lancing through her neck, and saw him, the Indian, the man who had taken her. He sat across the fire from her, his posture at ease but his eyes sharp and aware. He was mending something, a strip of leather, working the sinew through it with practiced efficiency. His long hair was loose now, falling over his shoulders in a way that made him look both untamed and wholly in control. He did not acknowledge her at first, letting the silence stretch between them, heavy with meaning. Julia's mouth was dry, her voice rasping. "Where am I?" The man didn't look up. "You are not dead." It was not the answer she wanted. She swallowed, glancing around, trying to piece together what had happened. "You're home?" she asked, though the word felt foreign in her mouth. He nodded once. She shifted under the blanket, wincing at the dull ache in her limbs. She had been carried far. She could feel it in the deep-set exhaustion weighing her down. Why? Now he did look at her. His dark eyes were unreadable, reflecting the firelight in a way that made them seem endless. "You were dying." She had nothing to say to that. It was the truth. Julia pushed herself up, feeling the heat of the fire seep into her skin. "You should have left me." A shadow of something, amusement, flickered across his face. but it was gone before she could be sure. He returned to his work, seemingly unconcerned with her. "I did not." The simplicity of his words unsettled her. She studied him, searching for some sign of his intent, but his face revealed nothing. Her fingers curled around the hide covering. "Her? What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice quieter now, edged with suspicion. For a long moment he didn't answer. Then he set down his work, leaning forward slightly. Nothing. She wanted to believe that, but she had lived too long among men to trust it. Nothing came without cost, and yet as she sat in the warm glow of the fire, her body no longer shaking from exhaustion, she realized something unsettling. For the first time in days, she wasn't afraid. A new sound reached her ears, the distant murmur of voices, women's voices, laughter, conversation, the occasional sharp bark of a child. This wasn't just his home. It was part of something larger, a village. Her stomach clenched. If there were others, then her fate was not solely in the hands of the man before her. She was a stranger here, an outsider. She did not belong. And yet, she was alive. The man rose, stretching his limbs with an ease that only sharpened how weak she felt in comparison. He gestured toward a small clay bowl resting near the fire. "Eat." She hesitated, her pride bristling at the command, but her hunger won out. She reached for the bowl, bringing it to her lips. The broth was warm, rich with the taste of meat, and herbs she could not name. She drank slowly, aware of his gaze on her. When she finished, she set the bowl aside, licking the last traces of moisture from her lips. "Who are you?" she asked. He regarded her for a moment before answering. "Tasso Hanoi," he said. It took her a second to register it. "Tasso Hanoi," she repeated, the syllables unfamiliar in her mouth. He gave a slow nod. Tasso. The name suited him. Strong, unyielding. She hesitated before saying, "Julia." His gaze held hers, something quiet passing between them. Then, with nothing more, he turned and stepped toward the entrance of the shelter, pushing aside the hide that covered the doorway. Warm light spilled in, and beyond him she caught her first glimpse of where she truly was. Outside, the village was alive with movement. Women worked at looms, their hands deftly weaving patterns into fabric that rippled like water. Children ran barefoot across the dusty ground, their laughter rising in the air. Men stood gathered near the edge of the settlement, speaking in low, serious voices. She swallowed. This was not her world. Tasso glanced back at her. "Come?" It wasn't a request. Julia hesitated, but in the end she had little choice. Her legs were unsteady as she rose, her muscles protesting with each movement, but she followed him. As she stepped outside, the sun painted the world in gold and amber, casting long shadows over the village. Eyes turned toward her, whispers beginning like the rustling of leaves. She felt them before she saw them, the weight of judgment. A woman approached, her gaze piercing. She was older, her dark hair streaked with silver, her posture both regal and stern. She studied Julia with open scrutiny, her arms crossed over her chest. "She is weak," the woman said, the words in a language Julia didn't understand. "Tasso," responded in the same tongue, his voice steady, unbothered. The woman's gaze flicked back to Julia, considering. Then, without warning, she reached out, fingers brushing against Julia's arm. A slight frown crossed her face. She spoke again, this time softer. Tasso nodded. Julia glanced between them, frustration rising in her chest. "What did she say?" Tasso met her eyes. "She says you are thin. You need food." It was not the answer she had expected. Julia swallowed, hard, trying to regain some sense of control over the moment. "Who is she?" "My sister," he said simply. The woman, Tasso's sister, gave a final glance before turning and walking away, her posture stiff with disapproval. Julia exhaled. Slowly. "She doesn't like me," she murmured. Tasso gave the barest hint of a smile. "She does not know you." Julia crossed her arms, bracing against the weight of so many eyes upon her. "And the others?" she asked. "What do they think?" Tasso was silent for a moment. Then, with quiet certainty, he said, "They wonder why I saved you. The words settled heavy in her chest. She wondered the same thing. She turned away, letting her gaze sweep over the land beyond the village. The horizon stretched wide and unbroken, the mesas in the distance painted in the colors of fire and dusk. It was beautiful, wild, a world untouched by the kind of men who had abandoned her. She looked back at Ta'aso, meeting his steady gaze. What happens now? He considered her for a long moment before speaking. You stay. The finality of it sent a shiver down her spine. Stay. She had been given no choice when she was left to die, and now once again she was at the mercy of others. But this time something was different. For the first time since she had lost Samuel, since she had been cast aside like nothing more than a burden, she felt something unexpected. A chance, a test, and perhaps, if she was strong enough, to take it, a new beginning. The desert had a way of stripping a person down to their bones, of forcing them to face what they were truly made of. Julia learned this within days of her first lesson with Ta'aso. There were no soft introductions, no gentle easing into the ways of his people. If she was to survive here, if she was to stay, she had to learn. And learning, she quickly discovered, meant suffering. She had spent years watching her husband hunt, had seen men skin deer, trap rabbits, and carve up buffalo. But knowing and doing were two different things. The first time Ta'aso handed her a bow, she nearly dropped it, her fingers weak from hunger and exhaustion. He didn't offer her instructions, only a quiet, steady look before stepping back, giving her space to figure it out. She pulled the string, feeling the tension bite into her fingers. The raw strength required more than she expected. The arrow wobbled, uncertain, before she loosed it. It fell limply into the dust 3 feet ahead. A small noise, something like amusement, escaped Ta'aso. Julia's cheeks burned. That was just practice, she snapped, adjusting her grip. Ta'aso simply gestured for her to try again. It took nearly 20 attempts before the arrow finally sailed toward the target, a bundle of dried grass tied together in the shape of a hair. It missed, striking the dirt beyond it, but the motion had felt different, smoother. She set her jaw, determined. Ta'aso gave a single nod. Again. Day after day she repeated the motions until her arms ached, until her fingers were raw. The blisters burst, new ones formed, and still he pushed her. She told herself she hated him for it, for the way he barely spoke as he corrected her stance, for the way he simply walked away when she grew too exhausted to continue. But as the days passed, the hatred turned to something else, understanding. This was how they all learned. Not with coddling, not with false praise, but through the quiet expectation that she would endure, and she did. She woke before dawn, taking the bow in her hands without being told. She pulled the sinew tight, feeling how the tension had become familiar, a part of her. She loosed arrows until the grass hair had 3, 4, 5 shafts buried in its form. Then, at last, Ta'aso spoke. Tomorrow we hunt. A thrill of fear and excitement coiled in her belly. When the morning came, the cold air still clinging to the land, they set out. The sky stretched wide and pale above them, the scent of damp earth rising as they moved through low brush and rocky terrain. Ta'aso walked ahead, his steps silent, his movements fluid. Julia did her best to match him, but she felt clumsy in comparison, every shift of her weight sending a whisper of sound into the air. He glanced back once, his expression unreadable, then motioned for her to stop. She did. He crouched, pointing toward a set of tracks in the dirt, small, delicate. Rabbit. Julia held her breath as he signaled for her to nock an arrow. Her heart pounded. This was not a bundle of dried grass. This was life and death. She raised, the bow finding the balance she had practiced, steadying her breath the way he had shown her. The rabbit was there, half hidden in the underbrush, its ears twitching. She released. The arrow struck true. The rabbit gave a sharp cry, then stilled. For a long moment she could only stare. It was such a small thing, its body no larger than her hands pressed together. The warmth of life faded quickly from its form as she stepped forward, swallowing down the knot in her throat. Ta'aso knelt beside her, studying her face. He did not, Ask if she was ready. Instead, he handed her a knife. Her hands shook as she took it. The first cut was the hardest, but she did it. She forced herself to move through the motions, to push past the discomfort, to acknowledge that this was the way of the world, the way of survival. Tasso watched, but he did not interfere. When it was done, she exhaled, the weight in her chest shifting. He nodded once. Approval. For the first time since she had been left to die, she felt something close to pride. The days passed, marked by more hunts, more lessons. Tasso took her beyond the village, into the wilder parts of the land where she learned to read the wind, to recognize the shape of danger. One evening, as they returned, the sky shifting to hues of fire and violet, they reached a river swollen with recent rain. The current was strong, churning against the rocks. Tasso started forward, stepping carefully across the stones that jutted from the water, his balance effortless. Julia hesitated. "Come," he said without turning. She swallowed. Hard, testing the first stone with her foot. It was slick beneath her boot, the water rushing hungrily around it. She took another step. Another. Halfway across, the river roared louder, the next stone just out of reach. She hesitated, shifting her weight. Her foot slipped. The world spun. As she plunged into the freezing current, she barely had time to suck in a breath before the water dragged her under. The force of it hit like a fist, stealing the air from her lungs, tumbling her like a rag doll. She flailed, her arms reaching for anything, then a hand seized her wrist. Strong, unyielding. She was yanked upward, her head breaking the surface just as she gasped, coughing violently. Tasso pulled her onto the bank, gripping her arm as she choked on river water, her chest heaving. She looked up at him, shivering, the shock of what had just happened sinking. In his grip did not loosen. "You fear the river," he said, his voice quiet. She didn't answer. "You fear many things," her hands clenched into fists. "I am trying." The intensity in his gaze didn't waver. "Fear is nothing if you do not face it." Her breath still came in ragged gasps, her body trembling, but something about his words struck deep. She wasn't weak anymore. She knew that. She had fought for every bit of strength she had gained here, but fear still sat in her belly like a weight, and she hated it. She met his gaze, the fire of defiance sparking. "Then teach me." A slow nod. "I will." In the days that followed, he did. He made her cross the river again and again, until the fear dulled to something else. Respect, understanding. He made her climb the rocks, find her footing, trust the ground beneath her, and she did. The village no longer watched her with skepticism, but with something different. Not quite acceptance, not yet, but something close. And Tasso, she had thought. Him cruel at first, had thought him indifferent. But now she saw it for what it was. He had given her no less than he gave himself. No less than any of them. She was not just surviving, she was becoming. The sky hung low, thick with the scent of rain that had yet to fall. Julia tightened her grip on the knife at her belt, her pulse steady but sharp. The uneasy hush that had settled over the village told her that something was coming. Tasso had sensed it too. He stood a few paces ahead, his gaze fixed on the ridge beyond the farthest shelter, where the land sloped toward the open desert. They had seen the dust first, rising in the distance, the telltale sign of riders approaching. Now, the riders had come. Julia recognized them before she saw their faces. The settlers, the ones who had left her for dead. She should have known they wouldn't stay gone. The horses slowed as they neared, 5 men in total. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man, with a grizzled beard and an expression like old leather, reined in his mount and scanned the village with narrowed eyes. The way he sat in the saddle, the hand resting easy near his holster, told Julia all she needed to know. He wasn't here to talk, but neither was Tasso. "You got something of ours?" the man said, his voice flat, carrying on the wind. Tasso did not answer. Julia forced herself to step forward, her boots pressing into the damp earth. She kept her chin high. Though every muscle in her body screamed to run, the man's gaze landed on her, sharp and assessing. He spat into the dust. "Well, I'll be damned. Didn't think you'd last a day out here." Julia's fingers twitched at her side. but she didn't speak. Let them underestimate her. It was the last mistake they would make. "She's coming with us," he said. The stillness in Tarso's frame was more dangerous than any words he could have spoken. "She is not yours," he said simply. The man let out a short, humorless laugh. "She ain't yours either." His eyes flicked back to Julia. "You made a mistake, girl. You don't belong here." She met his gaze, the weight of her past crashing into her all at once. The days of silence in the wagon, the quiet, pitiful looks, the whispered words when they thought she couldn't hear. "She's too weak. She won't last. Best to leave her behind." They had already decided she was dead. She took a slow step forward, her voice steady. "Then neither do you." The man's expression darkened. "You don't get a choice." Tarso shifted, the air between them taut as a wire. "She stays." The man's hand moved toward his gun. Julia saw it before it happened, the slight tension in his shoulder, the tightening of his fingers. But Tarso was faster. His knife was already in his grip before the man could clear leather. A warning. The other riders tensed, but none of them reached for their weapons. "Not yet." The man's lip curled. "We could cut you down right now." Tarso did not waver. "You can try." The wind howled between them, an unspoken dare. Julia could feel the shift in the air, the moment where words would no longer be enough. These men had come expecting to take her by force. They weren't leaving empty-handed. She felt the knife at her belt. She had trained for this. She had bled for this. The man's fingers twitched. Then it happened. His gun cleared the holster, but Julia was already moving. She dropped low, the way Tarso had taught her, the way she had practiced over and over again until it became second nature. The bullet missed her by inches. She lunged. Her blade found flesh. A sharp cry. A curse, the man's arm jerking back as blood bloomed across his sleeve. Tarso moved like the wind, his knife flashing as he closed the distance between him and the second rider. The others scrambled, their hesitation costing them. One man wheeled his horse around, already retreating. Julia turned, knife still in her grip, breath coming fast. The leader, the man who had left her to die, stared at her. There was something in his eyes now, something he had never looked at her with before. Fear. He pressed his wounded arm to his side, his jaw clenched. For a moment, it seemed as if he might try again, might push this to the bitter end. Then his gaze flicked to Tarso, to the warriors now gathered, weapons ready, and he knew. This fight was over. He spat again, his anger barely contained. "You think this changes anything?" His voice was quiet now, meant only for her. "You'll always be one of us, no matter how hard you try to pretend." Julia stepped forward, close enough that he had to look her in the eye. "No," she said, "I won't." He held her gaze a moment longer. Then, with a sharp jerk of the reins, he turned his horse. The others followed. The dust settled slowly as they rode away. Julia's breath still came in sharp bursts, her grip tight around the knife. She forced herself to loosen it, to let the tension bleed from her shoulders. The village remained silent, watching. Then Tarso stepped toward her, his gaze searching. He didn't ask if she was all right. He didn't need to. Instead, he said, "You fought well." A simple statement. A truth. She let out a slow breath, something breaking open inside her. For the first time, she felt it. She was not a burden. She was not something to be cast aside. She was more. Tarso held out his hand, palm up, waiting. Julia looked at it. Then, without hesitation, she took it. Tarso rode through the ruins of what had once been a village, his people's village. Now only silence remained, broken by the occasional hiss of dying embers. Charred beams jutted from the earth like broken ribs, the skeletal remains of homes devoured by flames. Bodies lay scattered among the wreckage, warriors, elders, women, children. His grip tightened around the reins, his knuckles pale against the dark leather. The settlers had come in the night, ignoring the treaty signed with promises of peace. Tarso had been away, leading a scouting party through the mountain passes when the attack fell like a storm. By the time he and his men returned, it was too late. The treaty had been nothing more than ink on a page, and now it was as dead as those who had believed in it. Behind him, Warriors gathered in a circle beneath the shadow of the War Council's tent. Their voices, low and edged with fury, murmured over the crackling fire. The decision had already been made. There would be vengeance. Taza stood before them, the weight of expectation pressing against his chest like a stone. Across from him, his father's old friend Nantan fixed him with a steady gaze. The old warrior's face was lined with time, his eyes like flint. "The settlers must learn," Nantan said. "Blood for blood." A murmur of agreement swept through the circle. Some spat into the dirt, others tightened their fists around their weapons. Taza said nothing. He knew what was coming. "A settler girl was seen near the borderlands," Nantan continued. "Alone. She has wandered too far from her people." Taza's jaw clenched. "She is not a warrior," he said. "She is a message," Nantan corrected. "A warning, a life for the lives taken from us." The warriors nodded, their eyes hard with grief and rage. Taza had fought beside them, bled beside them, and now they waited for him to take the burden they all carried. He had led them through battle before, but this was different. This was not war. This was a death sentence handed down without trial. "Find her," Nantan said. "Make sure her people hear what happens to those who cross us." The firelight cast shadows across Taza's face as he turned away. He did not speak, but the order had been given. He was the war chief. The weight of duty settled in his chest, like an iron brand. He rode out before dawn, the cold air biting at his skin. The land stretched wide and unbroken before him, a vast sea of ochre and dust. He followed the trail through the high cliffs, where the wind howled like a wounded beast, down into the river valleys where the brush grew thick and wild. The girl's tracks were easy to read, small, unsteady, the stride of someone lost but determined. For miles he followed the faint imprints left behind. The sun climbed higher, painting the rocks in hues of gold and rust. His horse moved with quiet grace, hooves pressing into the earth, leaving behind no trace of their passing. Then he saw her. She stood at the edge of a narrow creek, her boots sinking into the damp soil. She was thin, her frame draped in clothes too worn for a settler woman of wealth. Her long hair, dark with dust, was pulled back in a loose braid. But it was not her appearance that made him hesitate. She was kneeling beside a wounded coyote. Taza watched as she reached out, slow and careful. The animal's ribs heaved with labored breaths, an arrow lodged deep in its side. The girl whispered something, her voice too soft for him to hear. Then, with delicate fingers, she broke the shaft and pulled the arrow free. The coyote whimpered but did not lash out. Taza's grip on his knife tightened. It would be easy. One swift movement, quick, clean. But something about her held him still. She reached for a cloth tucked inside the folds of her clothing, pressing it against the wound. The way she moved, the way she touched the creature, not with fear, but with care, sent a flicker of doubt through him. This was not the act of an enemy. He dismounted silently, stepping forward. His footfall was light, but she heard him. She turned sharply, her eyes wide, one hand gripping the cloth still pressed against the animal's side. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. She did not scream, did not run. Instead, she swallowed hard and said, "If you're going to kill me, let me finish this first." Taza raised a brow. The defiance in her voice was not what he expected. "I was told settlers fear us," he said. Her fingers trembled against the blood-stained cloth. "I do, yet you do not beg." Her lips pressed together. "What good would it do?" Taza studied her, searching for signs of deception. But there was no deceit in her eyes, only exhaustion and quiet resolve. He nodded toward the coyote. "Why help it?" She hesitated, as if the answer was too simple. "Because it was suffering." Taza looked at the creature, its breath still shallow, its eyes half-lidded with pain. A wild thing, weak and dying. In her world it would have been left to the vultures. Yet she had stopped. "Your people took my brother," she said suddenly. Her words struck him like a stone. He narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" She inhaled, slow and steady, as if bracing herself. "My name is Abigail Dawson. My brother, Samuel, was taken by a war party 3 months ago. I've been searching for him ever since." Taza remained still. A settler girl wandering alone across Apache land? It was foolish. It was reckless. It was suicide. Who took him? He asked. She shook her head. Not your people. Another tribe. I don't know who. Taza exhaled, watching the way her fingers curled into the cloth at her knees. If she was lying, she was damn good at it. But something told him she wasn't, and that made things worse. She was not here to claim land. She was not here to spy or fight. She was just a sister searching for her kin. The weight of the War Council's command pressed against him. His duty was clear. Kill her. Make a statement. A warning. Yet as he stood there, looking at the coyote barely clinging to life, at the girl who had every reason to run but didn't, the words of his father echoed in his mind. A warrior must know the difference between justice and vengeance. Justice had died with the treaty. Vengeance would only bring more death. His decision was made. Without a word, he stepped past her. The girl stiffened, but he ignored her, crouching beside the coyote. The wound was deep but not fatal. He reached for his pouch, pulled out a bundle of dried herbs, and crushed them between his fingers before pressing them against the wound. The girl watched him, stunned into silence. You are going the wrong way, he said finally. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. What? If you are searching for your brother, you are heading toward Comanche land. She blinked. You know where he is. Taza met her gaze. No, but I know where you will die if you keep going. A gust of wind stirred the dust around them. Abigail's fingers curled into fists. I can't stop. Taza studied her, foolish, stubborn, but brave. He exhaled sharply and rose to his feet. Then you will not go alone. The words surprised even him, but once spoken they could not be taken back. He saw the confusion on her face, the suspicion, the disbelief. He could not blame her. Why? She whispered. Taza looked down at the coyote, still breathing despite its wounds. He thought of his people, burned and slaughtered in the night. He thought of the War Council, of Nantan, of the sentence he had just defied. And then he thought of her brother. Somewhere out there, alone. Because, he said, stepping toward his horse, I would want someone to do the same for me. He mounted in one fluid motion, then reached down, offering her his hand. Abigail hesitated only a moment before she took it. The night pressed in around them, the desert stretching wide and endless beneath a sky riddled with stars. Taza rode in, silence, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. The girl, Abigail, kept close behind him, her horse's hooves drumming a steady rhythm against the packed earth. She did not speak, and he did not ask for conversation. She was a fool for coming this far alone. A settler woman wandering Apache land, believing she could find her brother without meeting death first. He had seen men stronger than her fall beneath the weight of this land. The Comanche were not known for mercy. If her brother still lived, he would not be the same boy she had lost. The wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain, though the sky remained clear. The land was quiet, but Taza knew better than to trust it. Silence could be the most dangerous sound of all. After a while, Abigail pulled her horse closer. Where are we going? Taza did not look at her. South, her brows pulled together. That's not an answer. I don't have a better one, she huffed. You're helping me. I should know why. Taza exhaled through his nose, shifting in his saddle. The Comanche do not stay in one place for long. They move with the land, follow the herds. If they took your brother, we have to find their trail first. Her fingers tightened around the reins. And you think we'll find it going south? Glanced at her. I think we'll find it before something else finds us. A shudder passed through her, though she tried to hide it. She was learning. That was good. Fear had its place in the wild, but only if it didn't rule you. They rode on through the night, the air growing colder, biting through layers of cloth and skin. When the moon was at its highest, Taza slowed his horse, raising a hand. Abigail obeyed without question, halting beside him. She was quick, at least. That would keep her alive. Ahead, the land dipped into a dry ravine, the banks lined with brittle trees, and the remains of a creek long since dried up. Taza dismounted, his boots landing softly in the dust. He crouched, studying the ground. Tracks. Old but not too old, not Apache, not white men. Abigail slid off her horse, stepping carefully beside him. She followed his gaze to the prints pressed deep into the dirt. "Comanche," she whispered. Taza nodded. "A war party." Abigail swallowed. Could they have him? Maybe. She knelt beside him, tracing the edges of a hoofprint with her fingertips. What if he's already dead? Taza glanced at her. The question was spoken softly, but it carried a weight that settled deep in the bones. "Then we fight for his spirit," he said. She looked up at him, searching for something in his face. He did not know if she found it, but she nodded. Taza rose, scanning the terrain. The tracks curved eastward. He did not like that. East was closer to the edge of Apache land, where settlers still tried to stake their claim. It meant trouble from both sides. "We'll follow them," he said, "but we move carefully." They rode in the direction of the tracks, keeping to the shadows where the land allowed it. Abigail did not speak again, which Taza appreciated. He had little use for words unless they served a purpose. By dawn they reached the ruins of an old trading post, long abandoned. The wood was dry and splintering, the walls leaning in defeat. Taza motioned for Abigail to stay back as he approached, listening for any sign of movement. The place was empty but not untouched. A fire had been burned here recently. He crouched, sifting through the ash with the tip of his knife. Still warm. Someone had been here. He straightened, scanning the land around them. His gut tightened. Something was wrong. Abigail stepped up beside him. "What is it?" He opened, his mouth to answer, but then he heard it. The sharp, distinct click of a rifle being cocked. Taza reacted on instinct, shoving Abigail to the ground as the first shot rang out. Wood splintered beside them. Another shot. Another. Settlers. Taza rolled, drawing his knife as he pushed Abigail toward the cover of a broken wall. "Stay down," he ordered. She didn't argue. He pressed his back against the wood, his breath steady. A man's voice carried across the empty space. "Come out, Injun!" Taza's jaw tightened. Another voice. This one younger, nervous. "I saw the girl. She's a white woman. He's got her." More movement. 2, maybe 3 of them. Taza glanced at Abigail. Her eyes were wide with fear, but she wasn't frozen. "Good. Can you shoot?" he asked. She blinked. "What?" He reached for the rifle slung across his back and thrust it into her hands. "Can you shoot?" She hesitated. "Yes?" "Then shoot." He didn't wait for her to answer. He moved. A gunshot cracked through the air, missing him by inches. Taza closed the distance between him and the nearest man in seconds. The settler barely had time to raise his weapon before Taza's knife found his throat. Blood sprayed the eye. "Turst?" A second shot rang out, Abigail's, a cry of pain. Taza turned in time to see the second settler clutching his leg, his rifle knocked to the ground. He reached for it, but Abigail stepped forward, kicking it away before pointing the rifle at his chest. The third man was gone. Coward. Taza stepped toward the one still breathing, pressing the tip of his knife against the man's throat. "Why? Were you following us?" he demanded. The settler swallowed hard. "Didn't know it was you," his voice shook. "We thought you—" He grimaced, clutching his bleeding leg. "We thought you stole the girl." Taza's grip on the knife didn't ease. "You have no reason to be here." The man exhaled sharply. "We were tracking the Comanche." Taza's eyes narrowed. "Why?" The man coughed, spitting blood into the dirt. "Same reason you are." Taza stilled. Abigail stepped forward. "What do you mean?" The settler grimaced, shifting against the pain. "They came through the valley 2 nights ago, took 2 of our own." Abigail inhaled sharply. Taza watched the man closely, then pressed the knife just a little deeper. "Where?" The settler shook his head. "They moved too fast. We lost the trail near the river." Taza considered his words. If the Comanche had taken others, they might have Abigail's brother with them. But it also meant they would be moving quickly. Time was running out. He pulled the knife back and stood. "Go." The settler stared at him in disbelief. "You're letting me go?" Taza didn't answer. The man didn't wait to question it. He scrambled to his feet and limped into the desert, disappearing into the morning haze. Abigail let out a slow breath. "You didn't have to let him go," she said. Taza turned toward her. Killing him wouldn't have changed anything. She studied him, but he didn't let her look for too long. They didn't have time. "We keep moving," he said. She nodded. They left the dead behind and rode toward the river, where the tracks of the war party would either reveal their next move or vanish completely. Taza didn't know which he feared more. The fire crackled in the hush of night, its flames casting long shadows over the sand. Taza sat with his back to a gnarled mesquite tree, knife in hand, carving slow, methodical strokes into the handle of his tomahawk. The rhythmic scrape of steel against wood was a familiar sound, one that kept his mind still. Abigail sat across from him, arms wrapped around her knees, her face dappled with firelight. She had been quiet since they had left the trading post behind, and he had not pushed her to speak. Above them, the sky stretched black and endless, a sea of stars glimmering in the cold air. The wind had shifted hours ago, carrying the scent of river water and damp earth. They were close, he could feel it, but close was not the same as safe. The Comanche would not be easy to track, and if they had taken her brother, it meant they had reason. That alone made the risk higher. Abigail cleared her throat softly. "You never told me why." Taza didn't look up. "Why what?" "Why you're helping me." Her voice was quiet, careful, as though afraid of the answer. "It's not just about honor, is it?" He kept his eyes on the blade in his hand. "Honor is reason enough." She exhaled through her nose. "Maybe for you." Taza stopped carving. He lifted his gaze, meeting hers across the fire. There was something in her eyes, something searching, something raw. He had seen her face fear, seen her steady her hands in the face of death, seen her fight when she had to. But this was different. She wasn't asking because she wanted to know what drove him. She was asking because she wanted to understand why she mattered to him at all. He slid the blade back into the sheath at his belt and leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. The fire flickered between them. "My father once told me," he said, voice low, steady, "that a warrior does not measure his worth by the battles he wins, but by the ones he chooses to fight." Abigail tilted her head. "And you chose this one." Taza nodded. "I chose you." The words settled between them, heavy with meaning. Her fingers curled against the fabric of her trousers, and for a long moment she was silent. Then, her voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I don't know what to do with that." Taza studied her. He had expected as much. He had seen the way she carried herself, the way she tried to be steel even when she was breaking. She had spent too long fighting alone. She did not know what it was to have someone fight for her. "You don't have to do anything," he said simply. She looked down, biting her lip. The fire popped, sending a flurry of embers into the night air. "I lost everything," she murmured. "My home, my family, my people." Taza's throat tightened. He knew loss. He knew what it meant to have the world torn away beneath your feet. "And yet you are still here." She lifted her gaze. There was something like defiance in her eyes. "So are you." He let the silence stretch between them. Then finally he spoke. "Get some rest. We leave before dawn." She nodded, but did not move for a long time. When she finally did, it was slow, deliberate, as though she was unsure of her own steps. She settled onto her blanket, curling beneath its thin protection, her back turned toward the fire. Taza did not sleep. His knife rested in his palm, ready. The night was too quiet. It was the horses that warned him, the sudden shift of hooves against the dirt, the way they snorted and stamped uneasy. Taza's eyes snapped open. His fingers curled around his tomahawk as he rose in one swift, soundless motion. Abigail was still asleep. He moved quickly, stepping past the fire, listening. The wind had changed again. He heard it then, the soft rustle of movement, barely there, almost lost in the night. They were not alone. Taza turned just as the first warrior emerged from the darkness, a shadow against the starlit sky, moving swift and silent. Apache. Taza knew them at once by their dress, by the way they carried their weapons, by the look in their eyes when they saw him. He barely had time to shout before the first blow landed. Pain exploded in his ribs as he was thrown backward. He hit the ground hard, but he rolled with the impact, coming up on his feet, tomahawk raised. Abigail was awake now, scrambling to her feet, eyes wide with confusion. More shadows moved in the dark. 3 of them, one for each of the lives he had just taken at the trading post. Traitor. The word was not spoken, but he could feel it in there. Stairs Taza had known this day would come. He had just not expected it to come so soon. The first warrior lunged. Taza met him head-on, blocking the strike with his tomahawk, twisting his opponent's wrist, forcing the blade from his grip. He drove an elbow into the man's throat, sent him reeling. The second was faster. A fist caught Taza's jaw, snapping his head back. He tasted blood, but he did not falter. He pivoted, using the man's own momentum against him, flipping him onto his back. The third was behind him. Taza turned just in time. A knife arced through the air. Abigail screamed. Taza caught the warrior's wrist and twisted hard, wrenching the blade free. It hit the ground between them. His opponent did not hesitate. He drove forward, slamming Taza against the rough bark of a tree. Taza's vision blurred. The warrior pulled back his fist. Then the gunshot rang out. The man staggered. Then another shot. Blood bloomed across his chest. Abigail stood behind him, the rifle shaking in her grip. The warrior crumpled. Silence. Then the rustle of cloth, the wheeze of breath, and Taza realized one of the others was still alive. He turned. The first warrior was on his hands and knees, coughing blood into the dirt. His eyes locked onto Taza's, fierce with hatred. "You betray your people," he rasped. Taza stood over him. "No!" The warrior spat red into the dust. "You will never be one of them." Taza felt the weight of those words settle deep inside. Him. He knelt, his voice calm when he spoke. "I do not have to be one of them." The warrior's breath shuddered. Taza did not give him time to speak again. He drove his tomahawk into his chest. When it was done, Taza wiped the blade clean and turned to Abigail. She was pale, breathing hard, the rifle still clutched in her hands. "I had to," she whispered. "I had to." Taza stepped toward her, reaching out. Her fingers were cold, but she did not pull away. "You did what you had to," he said. She looked up at him then, something breaking behind her eyes. "I don't want to lose anyone else." Taza exhaled slowly. He did not know how to promise her something the world would not allow. So he said the only thing he could. "Then we keep moving." She nodded, and when she gripped his hand, she held on tight. The fire had burned low, its embers glowing like dying stars. The desert stretched out before them, dark and endless. Taza did not know what awaited them, only that there was no turning back. The sky was bruised with the first hints of dawn when they reached the ridge overlooking the Comanche camp. Taza crouched low, his breath slow and measured, scanning the cluster of tents below. Smoke curled from dying embers. Horses shifted in the corral. The camp was still asleep, but that would not last. Abigail knelt beside him, fingers tight around the rifle she had taken from the settler back at the trading post. Her face was drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes were sharp, locked on the distant figures moving near the fire. "There," she whispered. Taza followed her gaze. A group of warriors sat near the edge of the camp, speaking in low tones. Beside them, tethered to a post, was a boy, thin, ragged, barely more than a shadow. His wrists were bound, his head slumped forward, but even from this distance Abigail knew Samuel. She inhaled sharply, but Taza caught her wrist before she could move. "Not yet," he murmured. Abigail turned to him, eyes burning with desperation. "We have to get him. We will." His grip tightened, but not like this. Her breath came fast and uneven, but she nodded. Taza released her and turned back to the camp, mind working quickly. They were outnumbered heavily. The Comanche were fierce warriors trained to fight from the time they could walk. A direct attack would mean death. They needed a different approach. He studied the placement of the guards, the way the tents were arranged. The boy was positioned near the horses, a mistake, a quick escape if they could reach him. He glanced at Abigail. "Can you shoot a man off a horse?" She blinked at him, then nodded. "Yes." Taza nodded once. "Good. Because when this starts, we'll have to ride." she exhaled, steadying herself. "Tell me what to do." He looked at her for a long moment. A few days ago, she had been nothing more than a lost girl in the desert. Now, she was something else entirely. He reached for his knife. "You cover me. I'll get the boy," she swallowed. "And if they see you?" Taza smiled grimly. "Then shoot fast." He didn't wait for her response. He slipped down the ridge, moving through the shadows with the silence of a predator. The air smelled of damp earth and sweat as he crept through the camp, keeping low. The warriors by the fire were focused on their conversation, their weapons resting on the ground beside them. Too easy. He reached the edge of the corral. Samuel had not moved. Taza crouched beside him, touching his shoulder lightly. The boy flinched. Eyes snapping open, Taza pressed a finger to his lips. Quiet. Samuel's breath hitched, but he didn't cry out. Good. Taza reached for the bindings around the boy's wrists, cutting them quickly. The moment they fell away, Samuel sagged forward, weak from days, maybe weeks of captivity. Taza caught him before he hit the ground. Then he heard it, the snap of a twig, a voice, sharp with suspicion. Taza's head snapped up. A warrior stood near the horses, eyes narrowing as he took in the scene before him. For one frozen second, neither moved. Then the warrior shouted. Taza grabbed Samuel and hauled him onto his back. The camp erupted. Abigail's shot rang out before Taza had taken 3 steps. The warrior fell, blood painting the dust. Then there was nothing but chaos, shouts, gunfire, the pounding of feet as the camp roused. Taza ran. He reached the nearest horse, throwing Samuel across its back before swinging up behind him. Abigail was already mounted, rifle raised. "Taza!" She shouted. Another shot. Another warrior down. Taza kicked his heels into the horse's side, urging it forward. Arrows whistled past his ears, lodging deep into the earth. A warrior lunged, grasping for the reins, but Taza's tomahawk flashed, sending the man crumpling. Abigail was beside him, her horse galloping hard, her rifle empty now, used as a club against the nearest enemy. They broke through the camp's edge. More warriors surged forward, their cries rising into the morning air. Then, the Comanche chief stepped into their path. He was older, his face lined with the wisdom of 100 battles. He did not carry a rifle. He did not need one. The power in his stance was enough. Taza pulled his horse short, dust billowing around them. The chief studied him, then his gaze flicked to Abigail, to the boy slumped across the horse's back. When he spoke, it was in his own tongue, the words slow and weighted. "You have stolen from us." Taza tightened his grip on the reins. "I take only what was never yours." The chief tilted his head. "You choose this path, Taza of the Apache?" Taza exhaled, steadying himself. "I have already chosen." A slow nod. Then the chief stepped. Kaya sighed. The warriors did not lower their weapons, but they did not advance. The message was clear: leave and do not return. Taza wasted no time. He kicked his horse forward. Abigail followed. They rode hard, leaving the camp behind, pushing through the desert as the sun broke over the horizon. Only when they were miles away did they finally slow. Samuel stirred weakly, lifting his head. His eyes, dull with exhaustion, met Abigail's. "Abigail?" His voice was hoarse, disbelieving. She pulled her horse alongside his, her hands shaking as she reached for him. "That's me." Samuel let out a soft, choked sound and leaned against her, too weak to hold himself up. Abigail wrapped her arms around him, her breath shuddering. Taza watched in silence. The price of mercy had been paid, and now there was no going back.